Superhero media is in a weird place right now. A lot of people think that their time came and went with Avengers Endgame. Sure, there are a handful of shows that I've talked about quite a bit on this channel that have managed to break that trend, but much of the general public is already kind of over superheroes as a concept. So when AdHoc Studio announced earlier this year that their first story would be a narrative, choose your own adventure style experience about a superhero who stopped being super, I was skeptical. This was a novel idea in a world that had never really been established before. After all, Dispatch didn't have a niche but successful comic book run backing it like Invincible and The Boys did. All Dispatch had was Aaron Paul and a ton of passion behind it. And my god, did it show. Dispatch shouldn't have worked, but I'm glad it did. But to dive deeper into this, I'm gonna have to talk about spoilers, so you've been warned. And I think the first chip on Dispatch's shoulder was superhero fatigue. Yes, that's a term that gets thrown around a lot these days, but it's not necessarily as cut and dry as people are tired of superheroes. But honestly, there is some truth to that simple idea. We no longer live in a cultural landscape where a bad movie like 2016 Suicide Squad can break $1 billion at the box office just because it has superheroes and a ton of big names attached. But there will always be people who want to like superheroes and love them as a concept. But this dedicated crowd has been disserviced over and over again by projects that had a slew of production issues or just plain old bad writing. Thus, these audiences have gravitated towards projects that are actually fresh. The success of shows and movies like Invincible, The Boys, Reeves' The Batman, and Superman 2025 happened because the people behind these projects took the established superhero formula and made interesting changes to it. For example, Invincible is a story of growth and how it's constant and non-linear, directly contrasting how superheroes of old would beat the bad guys, get the girl, and save the day. The Boys is a story exploring the dark side of the concept of superpowered individuals. Matt Reeves' The Batman is a story about how a younger hero is learning the ropes while also establishing what heroism really means, and Superman is just a story about superheroes being kind in a world where kindness is old-fashioned. The truth about superhero fatigue is that people aren't as tired of superheroes as they are of the same stories being told over and over again. For example, most superhero media today just skips the origin story altogether. But that mostly works because these origin stories have already been told elsewhere. They exist in comic books, in older movies, in television, and even through secondhand accounts. We've already seen how Bruce Wayne becomes Batman, how Kal-El arrived on Earth, how the Fantastic Four became who they are, and many more. But Dispatch doesn't have that liberty, which begs the question, who the fuck is Robert Robertson III? Well, he's the protagonist, and he's what you get when you take the concept of if you're nothing without the suit, then you shouldn't have it, and dare to ask, why not? See, Robert is Mecha Man, and Mecha Man, a celebrated hero in the eyes of the public, is his everything. Because he's devoted his entire life to being a superhero, he's not a billionaire philanthropist. He doesn't have a cushy job as a journalist, he has no living family to speak of, and he's barely even a person. After a hard day's work of being a hero, he comes to an empty apartment and his dog. Robert Robertson III practically doesn't exist, and when his suit is destroyed and he's forced to stop hero work, he has to confront that reality, which is why he inevitably takes a job at the Superhero Dispatch Network, which is pretty much a hotline for superheroes, and begins working as a superhero dispatcher. And it's through this work that he meets his team, a bunch of ex-convicts who are willing to change their paths and become superheroes, even if they're initially really bad at it. And this is an interesting subversion of the origin story formula. See, usually we're met with a story about how this young individual acquires their powers or goes on a journey to become who they're destined to be. Peter Parker becomes Spider-Man because he gets bit by a radioactive spider. Bruce Wayne becomes Batman after dedicating his life to fighting crime, after losing his parents and going on a training arc. And even Mark Grayson becomes invincible after his powers start to materialize. But in Dispatch, we see how Robert effectively loses his powers. Instead of seeing Robert Robertson become Mecha Man, we see the opposite. Mecha Man becomes Robert Robertson III. Throughout the events of the story, we see Robert become an actual character. He learns to love working with his coworkers, something he's never really had to do before because he was a solo hero. He even potentially starts to love one of his teammates. We see Robert open up, make friends, and get back to a life of helping people, even if it's not the one that he always pictured. And of course, I can't forget to mention that Robert is voiced by the ever-amazing Aaron Paul, who really sells his character with his performance. But the real beauty of Dispatch is how Robert explores the theme of the story, because Dispatch is about redemption. Robert is a fallen hero, and he leads the Z-Team, a bunch of former villains, to become better versions of themselves. But redemption stories have been done before, and the truth is, redemption is fickle. We've seen different takes on the idea over and over again in all kinds of superhero media. Some stories about how certain people are beyond redemption, while others are more optimistic, showing that people are fully capable of changing if given enough effort. Dispatch is simultaneously both at the same time, because unlike your typical television show and movies, there is an element that changes the outcome of the story: player choice. Dispatch is a story that was written with the idea of player choice in mind. That's because, unlike the stories of Invincible, The Boys, and DC and Marvel comics, the story of Dispatch has branching paths. After all, it's a video game. Depending on your choices, Robert can be anything from a textbook hero who refuses to kill and always fights for the greater good, or a bit of an anti-hero who rejects traditional ideals of heroism. And the choices you make affect the story and effectively change the outcome. In fact, based on the results of my first playthrough, Robert successfully mentored his Z-Team and helped everyone achieve redemption. But not everybody can get this ending. Depending on your choices, Robert might not get the girl at the end. Others might not be able to redeem everyone on the Z-Team and stop them from going back to a life of crime. But no matter how the story ends, narratively, it all works, because redemption truly is fickle. And while it may come easy to some, for others, the path isn't nearly as linear. Ultimately, it's a story that's as optimistic or realistic as you want it to be. And while Dispatch wouldn't be what it is without Robert or the story, the real star of the show is the entire Z-Team. Good characterization is a growing trend in today's media landscape. Traditionally, a lot of characters in popular media kind of just existed without really having a personality, and we kind of just see them as their roles. For example, the average moviegoer probably wouldn't be able to tell you anything interesting about Pepper Potts or Jane Foster as characters, besides the fact that they served as love interests for their respective superheroes in their movies. Thus, a lot of new superhero media is trying to course correct by giving us side characters with actual personalities. James Gunn is really good at this, considering his current resume, namely the Guardians trilogy, Peacemaker, Superman 2025, Creature Commandos, and the Suicide Squad, all of which emphasize making the characters in the story feel like living, breathing people. And I don't think anyone has really been able to come close to this level of characterization, at least until playing Dispatch. In the about 7 to 8 hours it takes to experience all the episodes, every member of the Z-Team gets a significant amount of characterization that, by the end of the story, you know how all of them act and who they are as people. They're not forgettable side characters like the Warriors 3 from the Thor films, or even Maria Hill, who honestly I only remember because she was played by the same actress as Robin from How I Met Your Mother. And I think part of the reason that Dispatch does characterization so well is because the game gives us so many character moments to actually allow Z-Teamers to show off their respective personalities. A good example is in episode 5 where we get the bar scene. First, everybody has their own moments with the various other people at the bar, like Malevola winning money at arm wrestling and Flambe singing his iconic song. But when a fight inevitably breaks out, considering we are heroes at a villain bar, we finally get to see the Z-Teamers in action. In this scene, we get to see how everybody's powers work and their respective fighting styles and how they tie into their personalities. Prism uses her hard light to create clones and blind enemies. Malevola fights with her giant sword and incorporates portals, much like X-Men character Magic. And a character that I learned to love, Punch-Up, voiced by Sean McLaughlin, otherwise known as Jacksepticeye, shows us why his name is Punch-Up. It's a chaotic, fun fight scene, but it's also the first time we get to witness the Z-Team in combat firsthand. It's scenes like this and the housewarming party scene in the episode after that really let us get to know the characters, ironically without having to say much at all. But a solid narrative understands that good characterization is a constant process. We don't always have these big ensemble scenes where everybody's on screen and doing their own thing, which is why downtime scenes are also some of my favorites in movies and televisions. And by downtime, I mean scenes that happened before or after major story beats. Think Legolas and Gimli taking bets on who killed more orcs in the Lord of the Rings films, or the heroes of the realm singing songs and exchanging stories with each other right before the long night in Game of Thrones, knowing very well that this could be their last night alive. Dispatch gives us these kinds of scenes, but also a lot of characterization through the in-game banter during the calls. Some of my favorite moments playing the game happened not because of the story beats, but because the Z-teamers would talk to each other during the episodes. And it's because of these character moments that the final episodes got to have the impact that they did. Seeing this team grow to become the heroes they always had the potential to be, and learning to gel together and work as one is a trope that I will never get tired of. And ultimately, I think Dispatch works even in today's overly critical media landscape surrounding superheroes because it dared to be different and take the risks that we wish the big names would again. So if you haven't already, go check out Dispatch and support the devs. I don't normally talk about video games on this channel, but I thought I'd make an exception for this one because this game is more of a story anyway. But all in all, I can't believe Dispatch worked, and I can't wait for more.